Alrighty. Happy Friday, everybody. Welcome back to another episode from Beyond the Org. I am your co-host, joined by Eric Dreshfield, and as we continue down this series, we are continuing to dig deeper into the various elements surrounding technology and software implementation. Today will be a unique conversation. Today's guest is somebody that's not in the Salesforce ecosystem, but a lot of things that we're going to be covering will likely sound familiar. I'll keep it at that. Um, Before we jump in, I'd like to quickly do a shout out to our sponsor, Cluebot, for making this series possible. Cluebot is working for you to find how teams design, analyze, and deliver Salesforce solutions using AI-driven insights. So we're excited to have their support as we bring this conversation to life. Alrighty, well, let me go ahead and start by introducing our guest today. Our guest today is Jerry Loscalzo. He is an executive services operational model architect. I know that sounds that's a mouthful. We'll figure out what that is in a bit. He's also a chief officer with over 30 years of IT services experience. He's worked at major OEMs like IBM, HP, Hitachi, as well as services providers like Wipro and NTT Data. He is a builder and a fixer of operating models, specializing in scaling recurring revenue and protecting margins to align with sales, pre-sales, and delivery, which is an area I am very familiar with and looking forward to digging on that one a bit. And he's also writing a book. Looking forward to hearing about that book as well. But Jerry, welcome to the podcast.
Great, thanks for the intro. Much appreciated. And yeah, I've spent this last week just trimming it up. I now have, 50 illustrations in this book. And it's a business book, so I figured, to kind of knock you out of your trance and reading the dry words on the page, might as well have something pretty to look at. So that's what I spent the weekend doing.
That is great. Well, Jerry, I have to ask, when I hear operating model architect, services operating model architect, I get a lot, in my mind, but I would love to hear it from you. What does that mean?
Yeah, no, that's fair, and it's a great question, and yes, this is a title that I made up, more descriptive than what you find out there in the field, right? So you picked up on that really quickly. And how long have I been an architect of operating models? Well, there's two answers to that. One is never and always. So my entire career, I've been working on operating models and certain pieces and parts of it, right? Sort of unknowing. And then, 30 years later, I worked for NTT Data, really trying to solve a pretty standard issue that you see in the industry today. Salesforce users, by the way, just to tie in, your previous audience. But really what we're trying to solve was delivery quality. And once I left NTT Data and sort of looked back at the experience that I had with that team, I kept asking myself, what is the thing that we were missing? We knew delivery quality was structural generally, right? I mean, we have project managers, in everyone's world, we have project managers and engineers. And typically that's fine, right? Typically we hire great people do great work, and largely they're above and beyond. They're quite heroic in the work that they do. And that really leads into what we've been relying on for operating models in the services industry for a long time, which is really great people. The issue is, as you start to get as large as we were getting at NTT Data, we were at 70 million when I joined, just in the professional services organization, and grew into about 180 million as we left. We have excellent, great sales folks, great relationships with clients, but we were really asking that question about delivery quality. And I always knew that you needed to have practices. You needed to have a pattern. You needed to be able to buy. You needed to be able to tell the salespeople what they were selling. And I always knew that we needed this concept of bid and proposal, which I learned at one of my previous employers who had already set up such a thing. These are two sort of the centers of learning in IT services organizations. So I knew that was important, but I really didn't know how important it was. And really, I had an epiphany that said, what's important about those two things was, of course, it choreographs the selling of IT services. into something that delivery, they're the other part of the dance, so they can execute something known. That was all obvious, but and the idea that these were learning loops from delivery back into contracts that had been in proposal, and learning loops from delivery back into those patterns that we were defining, all of that sort of made sense. But what was the missing piece? It was this idea that we never maintained what I call intent. Client, and it's really project/client intent from the opportunity identification phase on the sales side all the way through delivery. And if it's a simple delivery, well, maybe we only have one or two handoffs to sort of negotiate that client intent through. Likely we have 3 or 4, especially if it's a large client, and NTT had quite a few large clients that were managed services, consulting, and professional services. So that's a number of handoffs to walk through. So long answer, short question. I've sort of emerged as thinking about operating models as a thing that really needs to get solved. When someone asks me delivery quality issues, could you come be a VP of delivery for me? That's the first thing I think of. Okay, yes, I'll solve your delivery quality issue, but what am I really? I'm an architect of your operating model, and I'm going to solve those issues looking at things from a structural perspective versus chasing down escalations and the band-aids that we talk about. I'm about root cause.
Wow. I mean, so I spent my entire career in professional services, right? In a variety of organizations, starting at Deloitte and some smaller firms, and the delivery consistency, delivery quality has always been a topic of conversation, and it was always relabeled as growing pains. I don't know if anybody else heard that before, and
which it is, right?
It is true, right? But you still got to keep the train on the tracks, so to speak. Meaning, there is still a quality that needs to be maintained. There needs to be a level of consistency across project team members, right? How we deliver a business requirements document, how we document the solution design, right? What does our architecture diagram framework look like? So these are all pieces that you're as strong as your weakest link, right? And if you're hiring like crazy, like you mentioned before, well, you might be taking making concessions on who you're hiring. So if you don't have a resilient process or governance, it really can test the limits of the organizational delivery team.
Yeah.
So completely there.
Yeah, and it's really it's so, I almost feel like a bit of a crusader here. It's so unfair to our team, our teams who are very good at what they do. And my last executive team, each on their own, in our one-on-ones would take me aside and say, listen, I'm not solving big problems for you. That's why I'm here. I am managing the chaos, right? And when I first joined the organization, I knew I needed to build practices, and I wanted to dive them into, okay, well, talk to me about the patterns you see. Let's start, coalescing those into something that we can sell. And the resounding, answer here is, okay, nights and weekend is the only way this is happening, right? We don't have any time to do this. That's the issue. That's what we run into. And you're exactly right. This is not a problem of a $100 million company. These are problems of multi-billion-dollar companies who are now leveraging the old operating model, and as they scale up, they're just not changing the operating model. I think that's a short answer.
I'd actually challenge that and say even the small folks, the 100 to 400 people shops also have these problems. I mean, there's a lot of Salesforce consulting firms that are in that 10-person to a couple hundred people space, and once you get to a couple hundred people, you really need to have some processes that
you're right,
did not exist when you had like 10, 20, 30 people. And I feel like that jump from like 30 to 100 people is like the biggest thing that breaks companies in our space. I haven't pinpointed exactly why, but I've seen it happen way too many times.
Well, if I had it my way, and exactly to your point, what I really want to do is and there's a lot of conversation. The new organizations, right, are tons of AI organizations who are building professional services. Those are the folks you'd love to say, here's what your operating model needs to look like, and it's going to be perfect for today, and it's going to scale into tomorrow. Sure, you're still going to have to hire, the difficulty of the logistics of making that happen around hiring all those people and managing them properly. All of that sort of table stakes. But yes, if we could start them off with the right operating model, boy, that'd be exciting. That'd be an exciting opportunity for me.
I think that's really interesting as well. And I think one of the things that you kind of highlighted without necessarily coming right out and saying it is the opposite of what a lot of people think right now with AI. Everybody's thinking AI is going to take over the world. It's going to simplify things. It's going to eliminate jobs. But I think the reality of it, you just pointed out, was it's just going to shift where the jobs are, and still people are going to be needed to manage the process and keep the plane flying, I suppose you could say, while all these changes are going on.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that. I think that's the exciting part, and I believe that as well. I mean, sure, if you were thinking you're going to be a level 2 network engineer, likely many of those roles may be shifted. But at the end of the day, yeah, it's how do we manage the governance around this? And it's a massive governance issue. The guardrails around this are key. And if you don't have patterns, which is, if you think about the maturity of any organization, whether it's a SaaS platform, or whether it's just pure IT services or professional services, if you don't get to the point where you have patterns and you have a portfolio of services that you can execute, and you can measure your organization by, listen, I only have 20% custom deals, the rest are all what I've got in my portfolio. You're not ready to automate. You're not ready to implement AI. Now, I would maybe say that if you're an organization that's in between having a repeatable portfolio, you may employ AI to help you recognize those patterns, but it's certainly not taking a prominent role in delivery until those patterns are established.
Makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like the whole I don't know how many times you all have heard this, but we're building the plane as we fly it, and that could be used in a lot of different scenarios.
Yeah.
But as I think about kind of how organizations are trying to scale, but sometimes they don't take a step back and say, well, what foundations do we need to have established? I mean, just in my career in the Salesforce space, I've seen a couple operating models. Salesforce had started their own, the V2 Mom. Eric, I don't know if you're familiar with that one. And I've seen a couple organizations use the EOS, an entrepreneurial operating system. But these are frameworks that I guess leadership gets trained on. But how you execute, how you deliver against those frameworks, how you continue to evolve, it sometimes can be a hit or miss. So, Jerry, curious to hear from you. I mean, are there any specific tried and true models that you've seen that work? Have you created your own?
Yeah. Well, so I in my book and well, I probably in all of my writings, and I've gotten quite prolific these days in the writings. I think I'm somewhere around 10 to 15 guides and white papers. I'm on book 2, really. I've already started book 2 because I couldn't really fit it all in book 1. Book 1 started looking heavy, I guess, is the short answer. I started putting all of these, research examples, checklists, so you can actually execute with it. But it really got to the point where it's like, no one's reading this. No one's dissecting this. And unless you give it to somebody that they can, give to chatbot, to chat GPT or whatever, that no one's going to really get to the bottom. So I really streamlined and made the first book work. But to your point, I would say this, that the operating models all make sense, and you'll see how they mature over time. It makes sense in general. when you look at the industry of IT service providers, and I was really looking at infrastructure service providers versus the world of SaaS and the world and other providers, because those models are a little bit different. No, although I'll say I have looked into those models as well, and it's very interesting in some, and we could talk about some of those. But in general, I've gotten to the point where I have built my own model that is based on those 30 years of experience, the 30 years of experience living and operating models at IBM and HP, building my pieces of them. Like I built a practice at HP, and then when I moved to mainline, we built another practice there. So I've built 3 practices over my years, and then parts of practices in other organizations. And so as they mature and grow, you'll see this small company operating model looks one way, and there's quite a few variations. By the way, I started my own company when I came out right out of college, so I'm very familiar with what a 3 or 4 person company looks like. And then to today, which is I built what I've called a lifecycle operating model. And what that focuses on is sort of the best practices of what a large GSI or MSP provider would execute on. It includes, and I have pictures. Podcasts are, I don't know how great we are with pictures, but I could maybe supply some afterwards. But I talk about a dual gravity model that shows the sales gravity, which is huge in most companies. This is where work happens. This is where the business comes from, and it should be a deep gravity model. We should be supporting the sales team as much as we possibly can. And then we have a delivery gravity model. Many times sales is sucking delivery right into it, and for good reasons, as I said, sometimes. But what you need to do is balance out those models. So you've got your 2 gravity models on the left and the right, and to temper them, we need an authority matrix that supports them. So there's an operating model itself. There is a control system, and that control system is made up of authorities. It defines key decision criteria. It maintains that intent, and it supports the learning loop in general. So the life cycle operating model is I would say the really only answer, with a couple of exceptions. I'll give you a quick exception. Worldwide Technologies has a great operating model that's focused specifically on engineering. So where my model, I talked about those 2 gravity models, I didn't say anything about architecture, because in mine, architecture lives in a bid and proposal stage. So instead of architecting, you're assembling deals based on the existing service components that you've already built. And any custom pieces get sent to the practice, and those architects live within that practice. Prematurity, NTT Data did this, and others did this, where they had an entire pre-sales organization. Many organizations do that, and it works for a while. The problem is that pre-sales organization doesn't typically handle small deals differently than large deals. It's basically a queue, right? So if you've got a small deal, it might take 45 days to get back to the sales team to hand to a client. And if it's a small deal, same deal, it's 45 days. So there's not a lot of fidelity there. They just get more engineers. They just keep pulling in more architects to support it. So my model really architecture is key, but architecture lives within these gravity models. So it's probably better shown than spoken to, but hopefully that makes some sense.
That situation you just described reminds me very much of the first SaaS company I ever worked for, and the way they did things. And what I think I described it once by saying was the sales teams are selling what I called vaporware. It was a software product that didn't yet exist, but they knew the concepts of it and what it could do. And once it was sold, the engineers and the programmers and everybody behind the scenes had to create that vaporware into reality, and in the same time constraint, the same 45 days in your example, and things like that. And it became an interesting challenge to live through that. And my function at that organization was primarily marketing. So I had a different dynamic and a different interaction with the sales teams. In a lot of organizations, going way back old school, a lot of IT organizations, it was always hardware blaming software for problems and software blaming hardware for problems. There was that same dichotomy between marketing and sales, where that's a marketing issue. No, that's a sales issue. And it's interesting how, regardless of the industry almost, and regardless of the time, how that type of feeling still exists.
Yeah. Well, I think part of it is because we feel so empowered by our technology abilities that it's almost, and I've heard this argument. This argument existed at my last company. This existed at the company before that. They believe that all client requirements were custom. Thus, there are no patterns. It's custom. Everybody's and sure, customers are different. They are unique. There's no question about that. But let's not confuse it with, if I'm building a software stack, I'm likely building the same software stack with a different set of features for one than the other, right? It's not usually custom in that way. But we've really hung our hat on the idea that it's custom, and practices are not always something we think about. So you'll see practices that exist in different operating models in different places. If practices live too close to delivery, then all practices really do is not build or recognize patterns and enforce patterns and have the authority to say, I'm not building custom, or I'll build it, but that's low priority, not 45 days. You can wait, 90 days for me to get to that. And I lost my thought.
So Jerry, as I'm trying to visualize this, two centers of gravity, right? You have sales on one side, you have the delivery on the other side. Does practices sit in the middle? I mean, am I thinking about this?
Thank you. Yes, and that's, you picked up my third. Thank you. Yes. So yeah, it does. Think of it from an org chart perspective, and I always say I'm not building org structures for people, but there are org ramifications. And in a perfect world, we would have a senior executive, maybe even a C-level executive, thus the chief services officer moniker here. A chief services officer would have responsibility not for sales, but it would only have responsible for the professional services organization, the consulting services organization, and the managed services organization, which is a big ask if you're a large GSI like NTT Data is, right? They had not just one managed services organization, they had multiple, and it wasn't just in one company or one geography. It would have been a very difficult thing for me to say, hey team, this is what I need you to do. But in theory, that's what we're building. We're essentially saying all of these folks report to that one person. And to your point, practices doesn't live in delivery. It doesn't live in sales. It is its own thing. It supports both sales and delivery. And that team uniquely reports up to that same executive team. As well as bid and proposal, they also have a table with that same CSO or SVP or EVP or whoever owns that. So, and it's perfectly fine to have practice live in delivery or live in sales in the short term. You just need to know that as you're maturing that organization, it needs to have the proper authority, right? And I use that word authority a lot, and that's really what I mean. Authority means I'm sitting at the table with the management team of delivery, as well as bid and proposal, as well as practice. Does that make sense?
Yeah, makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So to kind of take it back to something that was discussed earlier, and I want to make this practical for the audience. I'm sure a lot of the folks that are tuning in are probably developers, admins, BAs, PMs, maybe some middle management leadership, but I'm sure some of these concepts will feel familiar. What are in your opinion, what are some of the things that smaller organizations can do to really punch above their weight class? I mean, these GSIs are huge. They're, massive in their own right. Obviously, there's positives to that, but there's also a lot of negatives to that too. When we think about
Yeah.
the AIification of everything, they're definitely not going to be as nimble as a small 50, 20 to 100 person shop. But I don't really know where professional services is heading. I mean, I think we all have ideas, right, of where AI can potentially, not replace but evolve the operating model, or how we do work, or our go-to-market strategies, or all of the above. But just curious to, how can folks take this and really make it real for their organizations?
So in my sense, and sort of building off what Eric talked about for AI too, I see it as a force multiplier. So for organizations, for smaller organizations to quickly fall into an assembly line of delivering services in a repeatable way, the sooner they're doing that, the less chaos they'll be involved with, right? Small companies are very capable because of their people and because of how heroic they are, right? They're not dropping the ball, and the 3 to 5 people or the 10 people or even up to the 100 people, they're not dropping the ball, right? Because they are hyper aware of what's going on. They know what big deals are coming in. They are going to support it. But the sooner you can alleviate the pressure of reducing heroic behavior into process behavior, the faster they're going to be able to become that force multiplier to enable something like automation and AI. That's sort of my thinking. It's probably the answer you'd expect me to give, but that's where I would sit in the suggestion.
One thing that came to my mind while you were just talking there was I think the difference, if we could call it that, between the smaller, more nimble organizations and the larger ones. And I feel like that all has to center around the communication channels and the openness of communication within the organization, and how easily organizations share data and share information within themselves. Obviously, if you only have 5 people in your organization, that's going to be a lot simpler and happen a lot quicker than if you have 300, 500, 1,000 people in the organization, because it's, as you get larger, you have more chains of management, perhaps is the term I'm trying to think of, and getting the cross pollination between those groups becomes more difficult.
Yeah, how you manage knowledge is really the focal point of my operating model. As it turns out, organizations that succeed, organizations that continue to drive revenue up, and organizations that maintain that 40% margin versus allowing that margin to erode, those are the folks who learn, and not individual learning, but learn as an organization. So that's what I mean, and it seems a little silly when you think about it. This is the pinnacle of how we support multi-billion-dollar companies is, hey, maybe we should learn as an organization. It's sort of silly that we've forgotten about it as an industry, and a little silly that I've reminded myself and maybe the industry that we need to do it again. But that's the missing piece.
I mean,
In fact, I have a
Jeremy,
formula somewhere that said that and I can't remember it offhand, but it's something. In the end, it basically said to drive up. Oh, I gotta look it up while we're talking here if I can. But the formula basically says exactly what I described.
yeah, I mean, it's not too far-fetched though, because silos exist in so many different ways in organizations. And when we say institutionalizing the knowledge, or the tribal knowledge that people have that gets lost when people leave, I mean, this is a true ramification of this information is not available to everybody. We're recreating slides, we're redefining integration patterns. If we've already done it 5 times before, why is it not easy accessible? And I think this is where AI could be that force multiplier to help us be smarter, not work harder. And obviously there's a minimum threshold of data quality which companies have to go through. And I think professional services or consulting firms have always told clients that, right? You want to do this and that, well, you need to have good data. So they almost have to practice what they preach. And it'll be an interesting next few years to see how organizations in our world of professional services really evolve, and which ones make it, which ones don't, which ones get consolidated. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, and part of the analysis we did at NTT Data was, so our innovation team, Gideon and his team, started asking questions that we thought AI could answer, and we pointed them toward our repositories, and we were able to answer some very interesting questions about average cost per site with particular deals. We were able to answer. Well, I guess I'll segue into this. We looked at every single SD-WAN implementation we've done since the beginning of SD-WAN. I think, what is that, maybe 10, 15 years, something like that. And we identified that over that time, we had never been profitable on one of those deals, not once. And it wasn't just zero. I mean, it was in the negative numbers. So we lost money on every single one of those deals, and we didn't know it until we went back and looked at that environment and looked at those environments. So I can tell you we fixed that since then. We realized a number of fun things. One is you can't charge network rates for even our tier one delivery architect. We were building out essentially for network architects. When we looked at the industry for security and SaaS, it was double the rate. It was sometimes let's just say it was double the rate. So we were undercharging clients, number one, and number two, we were architecting things without the benefit of the last deal, right? So our architects, very smart, probably takes $2,500 to install a device at a site and have it work. Well, when you deliver SD-WAN and you deliver Palo Alto SD-WAN, for example, you're not just implementing a device at a single site. You may be re-architecting their entire security policy set. You might be, troubleshooting. They may be a matrixed environment. So they're not serving, serving applications from the hub. They're serving it from the edge. They're serving it from the spoke, not the spoke, but from individual sites. So you may be defining new routes, new VPNs. This is not $2,500 a site. Sure, let's say it's $2,500 a site to install it. But what about all the other stuff? And when you do the math, let's just say it's probably 6 times that per site on average per SD-WAN environment. So yes, AI is a great place to go, hey, tell me what we should already know, right? About the deals that we bid, and it's a great place to start and a great place to start building your patterns.
Absolutely, yeah. And as we wrap up, I want to just bring it back to the Salesforce space. So I kind of think I understood what you were talking about right now. I have a couple of friends in the network engineering space, and I'm an engineer myself, but I have gone into the world of tech and IT. The way I would look at it is delivering a sales cloud for an SMB client with 20 users is not the same effort as implementing a national CRM for a large-scale multi-billion-dollar organization. I mean, there's different nuances, there's different business units involved, there's the herding of the cats, if you will, right? So creating a page layout it should be the same effort in theory, right? Creating custom fields, but it's the volume of things you have to do and the differences of things you have to do, all the automations and the nuances. So, I spent a lot of time in pre-sales, and oftentimes I get asked, like, well, how do you know how to estimate this? And it's really a science and an art, where there is the tangibles of the hands to keyboard, but then there's the everything else, and everything else is usually significantly more. And I would always get pushback on it, and when I explain it to people, this is how the project will be ran. It's like, actually, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's like contractors, they did, if you want to install some pavers in your backyard, they'll typically take what? The cost of material multiplied times 2 or 3, and that's it. That's as far as their estimation goes. But at least they get a formula, right? And I think it generally works. For us, the nuances in the IT side are much more complicated. For example, how about the formality? If I'm talking to a manufacturing company, that's very different than talking to the World Bank. And how does that translate in terms of how you estimate that project? You can expect that your project management will be heavier, more hours, more senior, things like that. So it's, art and a science for sure.
yeah,
Yeah,
and I think go ahead, Eric.
I was going to say, I think one of the things you just pointed out is something that maybe people need to keep in the forefront of their conversations a little bit when they're doing these kinds of things, and that's whether the industry itself is a regulated industry or not. You mentioned financial services, and that's the first thing that came to my mind was you've got all these governmental regulations you've got to keep in mind as you're building this stuff out. But for contracting and construction industry, perhaps you don't have the same level of that control that's beyond your
Yeah,
control.
it is. Yeah. And the stories I'm sure we can all tell about that time we estimated a project and then the customer said, "Yeah, I don't need you for a little while. Let's touch base next quarter." It's like, well, wait a second. Number one, did we think about that in the contract? Can we afford to pause for these guys? And the answer is, well, we didn't think about it in the contract in the first place, so I guess we got to pause. And now we got to wind back down, get other people to work on things. It's a real problem. Our contracting ability is only as good as the last contract if we're told about the last contract, and that's something we just see rampant throughout our organization. We just don't. Knowledge management is one of the things that you cut, in bad times, and it turns out that's the thing that drives your success going forward. So, who knew?
Absolutely. Well, I'll just try to summarize my takeaways from today's conversation, so folks that are tuning in can have some practical next steps that they can run with. So, for leaders, right? Folks in leadership positions in sales, delivery, and if your organization has a practices concept, maybe in the practice space as well in operations, need to define some governance frameworks around how you collaborate within your teams and also cross-functionally. How do you do things like sales to delivery handoff? How do you do things like resource requests, right? How do you do things like staffing, forecasting needs? These all become, pieces of a much larger puzzle that hopefully creates a well-oiled machine. For architects, devs, technical folks that are, very much those client-facing individuals, go from being a yes man or woman to just having those difficult conversations proactively. I mean, we've done things, we've done a lot of work for clients, right? And it's time for us to be more consultative as opposed to just being, a development arm for clients. They didn't hire us to be developers. They hired us to be their advocates and consultants and specialists. And we need to do that more often. And then from an operational lens, right? Making sure that we're protecting the margin as much as possible, looking at how is their market margin leakage. I mean, there's margin at the project level, right? There's margin at the practice level, there's margin at the broader delivery org level, there's a company margin. So looking at it all on multiple layers becomes so critical to see where is there areas of margin uplift or improvement, and oftentimes finding ways to deliver sellable repeatable workflows or managed services where it's kind of forecastable revenue. That's a good start. But yeah, I mean, I think that's a big piece, because at the end of the day, margin matters, right? These companies are in the business of making money, and also building trust with clients, and those two should go hand in hand. It just can't bleed for too long and expect to exist in the world we live in. Governance is key, but you can't automate without governance. So having that established framework defined. So we'll see what Jeremiah's book brings to the table. So Jerry, as we wrap up, I mean, what's the next steps on the book? When can people start getting their hands on it? That's the question I have.
Yeah, I'm still looking for a rep / publisher. So that's the
Okay.
manuscript is complete. And I've got some really great industry leaders who've been reviewing it with me. So that it's just been tremendous help from from my past. So shout out to all those guys and girls. But really, I'd say the words are on the page, the illustrations are done, the front page, the back page is ready to go. I have white papers and guides that are I'm just they are free, so reach out to me. Be happy to share it. They are in fact on my website, which is lifecycleauthoritygroup.com. Is it? Geez, I think that's the first time I've actually said what it is out loud. I'm pretty sure I'll send a note
We'll
back.
double check on the website, and we'll correct it in the description if it is not correct. And
Yeah,
Jerry, what's the name of the book? Just out of curiosity, what's the title of the book?
The title of the book is Lifecycle by Design.
Okay.
And it's the tagline. I think I've
We'll
changed
be on the
3 or 4
lookout for it
times.
then.
Yeah. It's on bookshelves in stores near you soon, I think. Quote.
All right. Well, TBD then. We will definitely be on the lookout, Jerry, once it is published and in the hands of the consumers. But Jerry, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast, on the Beyond the Org podcast. And to my co-host Eric, it's always a pleasure jumping on these conversations. Thank you to our audience members for joining in and tuning in and listening in to the conversations. If there's any ideas or any topics that are burning in your minds that you really want to hear about, just shoot them our way, and we're more than happy to fit them into our program. And again, thank you to our sponsor, Clubot, for making this possible. Until next time, everybody, thank you all.
Right. Thanks,
Take care,
guys.
everyone.
Thanks, Omar. Thanks, Eric. See you guys.